The courtroom was already heavy with tension long before the hearing began. A low murmur floated across the chamber as spectators filled the wooden benches, their whispers blending with the faint hum of overhead lights. Reporters stood along the side aisle, adjusting cameras and checking recorders, sensing that this case carried more weight than a routine proceeding. At the center of the room stood a tall black man in handcuffs. He wore a simple grey suit, clean, neatly pressed, but modest. Nothing about his appearance suggested wealth or influence. His name on the court docket read, Marcus Hayes. To everyone present, he was just another federal defendant, accused of assaulting a police officer outside a government building 2 weeks earlier. According to the arrest report, he had been aggressive and resistant. The prosecution had already shaped the narrative, painting him as a threat to law enforcement, someone unstable, someone dangerous. But the man standing there didn't reflect that image. Marcus stood unnaturally still. His back was perfectly straight, shoulders squared, chin level. Even with steel cuffs restraining his wrists behind his back, there was a quiet command in his posture, composed, disciplined, controlled. Not the posture of a criminal, the posture of someone trained to endure pressure. Across from him stood Officer Daniel Briggs, the arresting cop. Mid-40s, heavy build, reputation for forceful arrests. His uniform was pristine, badge polished, but his expression carried open contempt. He watched Marcus closely, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. "Still think you're too good to speak?" Briggs muttered as he stepped closer. Marcus didn't respond. His gaze remained forward, calm and unreadable. That silence irritated Briggs more than any insult could have. Court staff moved around preparing documents. A clerk stacked legal files. The bailiff checked the entrance doors. The judge had not yet entered, leaving the courtroom in a brief procedural pause. Mounted cameras in each corner recorded everything quietly, every movement preserved for the official record. Briggs leaned closer, invading Marcus's space. "Men like you always act tough in cuffs," he sneered. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus lifted his eyes and met the officer's stare. There was no fear in them, no anger either, just control. The kind built through years of discipline. That look unsettled Briggs. It didn't feel submissive, it felt measured, as if Marcus had faced far worse confrontations and learned exactly when not to react. A few spectators noticed the exchange and leaned forward. The energy between the two men felt charged like tension before lightning strikes. Briggs mistook the silence for disrespect. His jaw tightened, his temper already thin-edged, closer to snapping. He stepped forward again, too close, and in that thick, watchful silence with cameras rolling and authority hanging in the balance, the line between law and abuse began to blur. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but the moment about to unfold would change every life in that room. Without warning, the fragile restraint holding the moment together shattered. Officer Briggs's hand moved before thought could catch up. Crack. The slap exploded across the courtroom, sharp, violent, echoing off the wooden walls like a gunshot. Every whisper died instantly. For a split second, time froze. A clerk near the aisle gasped, her stack of files slipping from her hands and scattering across the polished floor. A reporter halfway out of his seat stood fully now, eyes wide in disbelief. Even the bailiff stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or wait for the judge's entrance. Marcus's head turned slightly from the force of the impact, but the rest of his body didn't move. He didn't stumble, didn't protest, didn't raise his voice. Slowly, almost mechanically, he reset his posture, back straight again, chin level, eyes forward. The restraint was more shocking than the slap itself. A faint red mark formed on his cheek, but his expression remained controlled, emotion locked beneath discipline. Briggs, breathing heavier now, became aware of the room watching him, yet instead of stepping back, His arrogance deepened. "Look at me when I talk to you," he barked. Marcus turned his face toward him calmly. Still silent. That silence felt like defiance. Briggs grabbed Marcus by the collar and yanked him forward, tightening the cuffs painfully behind his wrists. "You people only understand force," he muttered, loud enough for nearby spectators to hear. A murmur of discomfort spread through the benches. Several people exchanged uneasy glances. One woman discreetly reached for her phone despite strict courtroom recording rules. But what Briggs ignored or forgot was that the courtroom was already recording from multiple official angles. Mounted federal cameras captured everything in high definition. Clear audio, no blind spots, every second preserved as legal evidence. Marcus inhaled slowly through his nose, steadying his breathing. The kind of controlled breath used to suppress pain and emotion. Not civilian behavior, trained restraint. The contrast was unsettling. The man in handcuffs appeared more in control than the officer holding him. Briggs shoved him toward the defense table. "Stand there," he ordered harshly. Marcus obeyed without resistance. Not submissive, measured, as if choosing restraint rather than being forced into it. That distinction went unnoticed by Briggs, but not by everyone else. In the gallery, an older military veteran narrowed his eyes, studying Marcus's posture, the way he absorbed humiliation without reaction. Recognition flickered faintly. Near the Clark's station, a court technician glanced nervously at the live recording monitor, where the slap replayed in a preview window as the system archived footage in real time. Evidence already secured. Yet Briggs straightened his uniform confidently, convinced he had established dominance in the room. He exhaled sharply, adjusting his badge as if nothing improper had occurred. What he didn't realize was that in less than an hour, that single strike delivered in arrogance would dismantle his authority, his career, and the badge he wore, in front of the very witnesses he'd tried to impress. The echo of the slap had barely faded, but Officer Briggs wasn't finished. If anything, the silence in the courtroom fueled him further. He tightened his grip on Marcus's arm and shoved him toward the defense table with unnecessary force. The metal cuffs clinked sharply as Marcus struggled to keep his balance without using his restrained hands. "Stand there," Briggs ordered. Marcus steadied himself and obeyed without resistance, positioning himself beside the table. Not submissive, controlled. That quiet composure only irritated Briggs more. "Former security guard thinks he can put hands on police," he said loudly, making sure the gallery could hear. "You people always think you're above the law." A wave of discomfort moved through the spectators. The language wasn't just aggressive, it carried undertones that made several heads turn uneasily. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm and even. "I never assaulted you." It wasn't defensive. It was factual. Briggs laughed a sharp, mocking sound. "Tell that to the charges." He pushed Marcus's shoulder again, forcing him to remain standing rather than allowing him to sit beside his attorney. The defense lawyer rose immediately. "Your Honor," he began, before realizing the judge had not yet fully taken the bench. "Procedural delay. No immediate intervention." Briggs used that gap. He stepped closer again, lowering his voice just enough to sound threatening rather than performative. "You're not in control here," he muttered. "I decide how this goes." Marcus didn't respond. His breathing remained steady. Measured in through the nose. Slow release through the mouth. Pain management breathing. Stress control breathing. The kind drilled into soldiers, not civilians. In the gallery, the older veteran who had noticed him earlier leaned forward further, studying the defendant's posture, the way his shoulders remained squared even while restrained. Something about it felt familiar. Trained. Disciplined under humiliation. Briggs circled slightly, as if inspecting him. "Stand straight when I'm talking to you." Marcus was already standing straight. The command wasn't instruction, it was domination. A court clerk shifted uncomfortably at her desk. Another staff member avoided eye contact altogether. The humiliation had become public spectacle. Cameras continued recording silently from mounted corners. Every shove, every word, every violation of conduct. Marcus's cheeks still showed the faint redness of the slap, but his expression remained unreadable. No anger, no shame. If anything, dignity. That contrast unsettled more than the aggression itself. To most watching, he looked humiliated, but up close he looked restrained by choice, not fear. Briggs mistook it entirely. He leaned closer one last time. "Court's about to start," he said. "Better learn your place fast." Marcus slowly lifted his eyes again, calm, steady, unbroken. That same disciplined stare, the same silent strength, and for the first time a flicker of uncertainty passed through Briggs's confidence. Not fear, but the faint discomfort of realizing the man he was humiliating didn't carry himself like someone powerless. The judge adjusted papers at the bench. Proceedings were seconds from beginning, and the humiliation Briggs believed established his authority had just been permanently recorded from every angle. The courtroom finally settled as the judge took his seat. Papers aligned, microphones adjusted. The formal weight of the law filled the chamber, pressing down on everyone present. "All rise." The command echoed, and the room stood before sitting again in disciplined unison. Marcus remained standing where Officer Briggs had forced him beside the defense table, hands cuffed behind his back. The judge, Honorable Richard Halstead, glanced briefly at the room before focusing on the defendant. There was a pause, a subtle one, just long enough for him to study Marcus's posture. Then proceedings began. Case 4172, United States versus Marcus Hayes. The prosecutor stood, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, the defendant is charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct outside a secured federal facility." Each charge landed like a public accusation carved into stone. Murmurs rippled faintly through the gallery. Marcus showed no reaction, no visible enjeu, no anxiety, just stillness. The prosecutor continued, pacing slowly as he spoke. Officer Briggs approached the defendant for questioning. The defendant became hostile and physically combative, forcing officers to subdue him. Briggs nodded slightly from his position near the aisle, reinforcing the narrative. The judge's eyes shifted back to Marcus. "Defendant, do you understand the charges presented against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was calm, deep, controlled. "No tremor, no panic." The judge leaned back slightly, studying him more carefully now. "Do you wish to respond to the accusations at this time?" Marcus paused, not from uncertainty, but deliberation. "I respect this court," he said evenly. "Nothing more." The answer was unusual. Not defensive, not emotional, disciplined restraint. The prosecutor frowned, clearly dissatisfied. "Your Honor, let the record show the defendant displays no remorse." Still, Marcus did not react. The judge tapped his pen lightly against the bench, eyes narrowing with quiet curiosity. Most defendants showed something: fear, anger, frustration. Marcus showed control, extreme control. Meanwhile, Briggs watched with growing irritation. The calmness he'd tried to break minutes earlier remained intact. If anything, stronger. The judge flipped through preliminary documents, scanning arrest details. Then he paused. His eyes drifted upward again back to Marcus. "There's something unusual here," he said quietly, almost to himself. The defense attorney shifted slightly, but remained silent. Mounted courtroom cameras continued their silent surveillance, red recording lights blinking faintly in the corners. In the gallery, the older veteran who'd been observing Marcus leaned forward again, eyes narrowing deeper now. Recognition hovered just beyond certainty. Marcus stood unmoved beneath all scrutiny. Cuffed, accused, publicly humiliated minutes earlier, yet composed as if standing inspection rather than trial. The judge finally set the file down slowly. His instincts, sharpened by decades on the bench, signaled that the man before him was not what the charges suggested. But before he could speak further, a court clerk hurried toward the bench with a sealed folder marked Confidential Federal Review. The judge accepted it, brows tightening slightly. He hadn't requested additional documentation, which meant it came from higher authority. As he opened the seal and began scanning the contents, his expression changed. Subtly at first, then completely, and for the first time since proceedings began, the balance of power in the courtroom began to shift. The sealed folder rested heavily in Judge Halstead's hands. The courtroom remained unaware, but something had already shifted. He broke the federal seal carefully, eyes scanning the first page. His posture, once relaxed in procedural routine, stiffened almost immediately. The color in his expression changed. Subtle but undeniable. He flipped to the next page, then another. Medal citations, operational clearances, command authorizations, each document stamped with U.S. Department of Defense insignia. The judge slowly looked up from the file, directly at Marcus, not as a defendant, but as a man he needed to reassess entirely. The pause stretched long enough for tension to creep back into the room. The prosecutor noticed first. "Your Honor?" he asked cautiously. The judge didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted instead toward Officer Briggs. "Officer," he said slowly, voice measured, "did you review the defendant's full federal background prior to arrest?" Briggs frowned, caught off guard by the question. "I reviewed what was necessary," he replied. The judge's gaze hardened slightly. "I'll ask again. Did you request or receive clearance-level identification on Mr. Hayes before using force?" Briggs shifted his weight. "No, Your Honor," he resisted. That was sufficient cause. A dangerous answer. A murmur spread through the gallery. The judge closed the folder halfway, fingers resting on its edge. "Officer Briggs, are you aware of the defendant's prior service record?" Briggs gave a dismissive shrug. He said he was military. They all say that. A few spectators reacted quietly to the comment. But the judge didn't. He simply leaned back in his chair, studying Briggs now with the same scrutiny he'd earlier given Marcus. Then he looked again at the documents, reconfirming what he'd read. Finally, he placed the folder down carefully on the bench. The sound of paper against wood echoed louder than it should have. "This court will take a brief recess," he announced. Confusion rippled instantly. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, may I ask the cause for recess?" The judge didn't elaborate. Court security remain in position. That alone was unusual. Before the gavel could fall, the heavy courtroom doors opened. All heads turned instinctively. 2 uniformed military officers stepped inside, dress blues, medals gleaming beneath the lights. Their presence alone shifted the atmosphere. Then 4 more entered behind them, high-ranking by insignia. Decorated, command presence unmistakable. The entire courtroom rose instinctively, not from instruction, but reflexive respect. Even the bailiff straightened sharply. Officer Briggs remained standing where he was, confusion creeping into his expression for the first time. The lead officer approached the bench and handed official credentials to the judge. The judge reviewed them briefly and nodded. Permission granted. In the gallery, the older veteran who had been watching Marcus stood slowly to his feet, his eyes locked on the defendant, recognition fully formed now. Without a word, he raised his hand in salute. Marcus didn't return it, not yet, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Not defensive, acknowledging. Briggs noticed the salute, then the medals. Then the number of ranking officers now present in what was supposed to be a simple assault hearing. For the first time since entering the courtroom, his confidence cracked, and as the judge reached for the microphone again, the reality of the situation began closing in around him. The presence of the military officers transformed the courtroom atmosphere instantly. What moments ago felt like a routine criminal hearing now carried the weight of something far larger. 6 officers stood in formation near the entrance. Dress blues immaculate, medals aligned with precision, command authority radiated from them without a single word spoken. The lead officer, a colonel by insignia, stepped forward toward the bench with measured confidence. His shoes echoed sharply against the courtroom floor, each step reinforcing the gravity of his presence. Judge Halstead rose slightly from his chair as the colonel approached. Credentials were presented in a sealed leather fold. The judge reviewed them carefully, eyes moving line by line. Then he nodded. Authorization confirmed. The colonel spoke quietly, but his voice carried disciplined authority. Your Honor, we request procedural adjustment regarding the defendant, General Marcus Elijah Hayes. The title alone sent a ripple through the courtroom. General. The word hadn't yet been officially announced, but it lingered in the air like distant thunder. Officer Briggs frowned, confusion tightening his expression. He looked from the colonel to Marcus, then back again, as if trying to process information that refused to make sense. Judge Halstead returned to his seat slowly. He adjusted the microphone, then looked directly at Briggs. Officer, remove the defendant's restraints. Briggs blinked. Your Honor? The judge's tone hardened. That is a direct order. The bailiff stepped forward, sensing hesitation. But Briggs, now under the scrutiny of military command and federal authority, moved reluctantly behind Marcus. His hands, the same hands that had struck him earlier now, unlocked the cuffs. The metallic click echoed loudly. Marcus flexed his wrists slowly once freed, circulation returning, but his posture remained disciplined. He did not rub his cheek, did not display resentment. He simply stood, composed. The absence of visible anger unsettled Briggs more than confrontation would have. Freed from restraints, Marcus looked different. Not physically larger, but authoritative. As if the removal of cuffs restored an invisible rank the room hadn't recognized before. The colonel stepped beside him, not in front, not behind, beside, equal standing, a silent confirmation of status. In the gallery, whispers erupted uncontrollably now. Reporters scribbled notes frantically. Cameras zoomed tighter. Even court staff exchanged stunned glances. Judge Halstead cleared his throat, restoring order. This court will resume, he announced. But his tone had changed. Measured. Respectful. He glanced once more at the sealed federal folder, then at the military delegation present. The weight of institutional oversight now filled the chamber. Officer Briggs remained where he stood, hands stiff at his sides. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked uncertain, not defiant, not dominant, uncertain. The power dynamic had shifted not loudly, but unmistakably. Marcus stood free of cuffs, shoulders squared, gaze steady. The same calm discipline he'd shown while restrained now carried an entirely different meaning. It no longer looked like submission. It looked like command restraint. The judge reached for the microphone again, preparing to formally address the court. And as every eye turned toward the bench, the revelation that would redefine the entire case sat only seconds away from being spoken aloud. The courtroom had never felt quieter. Even the faint rustle of paper had stopped. All eyes were fixed on Judge Halstead as he adjusted the microphone in front of him. The sealed federal folder lay open on the bench, its contents now the center of gravity for the entire room. He exhaled slowly before speaking. For the official court record, he began, voice measured but carrying unusual weight. "This court has reviewed newly submitted sealed documentation verified by the United States Department of Defense." A ripple of whispers tried to form but died under the tension. The judge's eyes lifted toward Marcus, but this time, not as a defendant, as someone deserving formal recognition. He continued, "The defendant, listed in this proceeding as Marcus Hayes." He paused briefly, ensuring the room's attention was absolute. "Is not a civilian security officer as previously presented." A reporter's pen froze mid-sentence. Officer Briggs's brow tightened. The judge resumed. "The court formally recognizes the defendant as General Marcus Elijah Hayes, United States Army." The words detonated through the chamber. Gasps erupted instantly. One spectator audibly exclaimed. Another covered her mouth in shock. Reporters began scribbling furiously, some already reaching for phones beneath the bench. Briggs stood motionless, as if the title alone had struck him harder than any physical blow. But the judge wasn't finished. He lifted another document. "General Hayes is the recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Silver Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. Each medal landed like a hammer strike against Briggs's credibility. He has commanded 3 overseas combat operations and served this nation with distinction for over 3 decades. The courtroom atmosphere transformed completely. What minutes ago held suspicion now held reverence. In the gallery, the older veteran who had been watching Marcus stood to full attention. This time, his salute was formal, crisp, unshaking. Others began realizing what they were witnessing, not a criminal trial, but the public humiliation of a national war hero. Judge Halstead's voice lowered slightly for his final statement. For clarity of record, he looked directly at Officer Briggs. "The individual you struck in this courtroom is one of the most decorated military generals currently serving this country." Silence followed, heavy, unforgiving. Briggs's face drained of color. His posture, once puffed with authority, seemed to collapse inward under invisible weight. His eyes moved slowly toward Marcus, really seeing him for the first time. The calm posture, the disciplined silence, the restraint under humiliation. It all made sense now, but too late. Marcus himself hadn't moved. No triumphant expression, no anger. He simply stood composed, dignified, unchanged by the revelation of his rank. That quiet humility deepened the contrast even further. The judge closed the federal folder slowly. "The court acknowledges a severe procedural and conduct breach pending immediate review." The word signaled consequences still forming, but the revelation alone had already reshaped the room's power structure entirely. Authority no longer stood with the badge that struck. It stood with the man who endured the strike without breaking. And as reporters rushed to transmit the story beyond courtroom walls, Officer Briggs realized the moment that defined his career would now define its collapse. The revelation had barely settled when the defense attorney rose slowly from his seat. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady but carrying renewed authority, "the defense requests immediate playback of courtroom and arrest footage for the record." The request shifted the energy again. Judge Halstead nodded without hesitation. Approved. A court technician moved quickly to the media console. Screens positioned around the courtroom flickered to life, monitors typically used for evidence. Review now became the focus of every eye in the chamber. "Playback beginning," the technician announced. The first video appeared. Courtroom security footage. High definition. Time-stamped. The angle showed Marcus standing in cuffs exactly where he had been minutes earlier. Officer Briggs stepped into frame. Audio activated. The room heard his earlier words again, clearer, harsher through speakers. "Then, crack." The slap replayed, louder through amplification. Sharper, impossible to reinterpret. A collective flinch moved through the spectators as Marcus's head turned on screen from the impact. The technician paused the frame mid-motion. Zoom engaged. The image sharpened Briggs's hand fully extended across Marcus's face. Unprovoked. Undeniable. Judge Halstead's jaw tightened. "Continue," he ordered. The next footage loaded. Bodycam recording from the night of the arrest. Grania. Street-lit, but audio clear. The video showed Briggs confronting Marcus outside the federal building. "Hands where I can see them." Marcus complied immediately. His hands rose calmly into frame. No aggression. No resistance. Then his voice came through the speaker. "Officer, I'm identifying myself. I am—" The audio cut briefly from movement static, then resumed. "U.S. Army. My identification is in my inside pocket." The courtroom stirred. The footage continued. Briggs's voice responded mocking, dismissive. "Yeah? And I'm the president. Turn around." Marcus complied again. Slowly, non-threatening. The bodycam angle showed Briggs forcing him down harder than necessary, while backup officers arrived. At no point did Marcus resist. The defense paused the footage. "Timestamp 2114, the attorney stated. "No assault. No resistance." The technician resumed playback. Another clip surfaced surveillance footage from the federal building exterior. Multiple angles confirmed the same sequence. Compliance. Identification attempt. Forceful arrest. No aggression from Marcus. The narrative the prosecution built began unraveling frame by frame. Judge Halstead leaned forward now, elbows on the bench. "Officer Briggs," he said without looking away from the screen, "did you review this footage before filing assault charges?" Briggs swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor." The admission hung heavily. The final clip returned to the courtroom, slowed playback this time. The technician froze the exact moment of impact again. Evidence locked. Permanent. Undeniable misconduct. The defense stepped back. "No further clarification needed, Your Honor." Silence filled the chamber, but it was no longer tense uncertainty. It was judgment forming. Public. Institutionnel. Irreversible. Marcus stood where he had been throughout watching. None of the footage replay his humiliation. His gaze remained forward, disciplined even in vindication. Officer Briggs, however, couldn't look away from the screen, forced to witness his own actions from the perspective of the law he claimed to uphold. And as the final frame lingered, the courtroom no longer questioned what had happened, only what consequences would follow. The final frame of the slap remained frozen on the courtroom monitor. Officer Briggs's hand extended. General Hayes's face turned from the impact. Evidence suspended in time. No one spoke. No one needed to. The truth now existed beyond testimony preserved in video, audio, and federal record. Judge Halstead slowly removed his glasses, placing them on the bench with deliberate care. The gesture alone signaled the gravity of what came next. He looked toward the courtroom doors. "Internal affairs," he called. The doors opened almost immediately, as if the officers outside had been waiting for that exact moment. 2 investigators entered first. Plainclothes. Badges displayed at their waists. Behind them followed a senior federal oversight officer carrying a sealed enforcement folder. Their presence shifted the atmosphere from courtroom procedure to institutional reckoning. Officer Briggs stiffened where he stood. One investigator approached him calmly. "Officer Daniel Briggs?" His voice held no anger, just authority. Briggs swallowed. "Yes. You are being placed under immediate administrative suspension pending federal investigation into use of excessive force, misconduct in a federal courtroom, and violation of civil rights protocol." The words struck harder than the revelation before them. Public suspension. On record. In front of media, military command, and federal court. Briggs's face flushed with disbelief. "This is a mistake," he said quickly. "He resisted arrest. No, Judge Halstead interrupted firmly. The mistake was yours. Silence reinforced the judgment. The investigator extended his hand. Badge. Briggs hesitated. Only for a second. But that second spoke volumes. Slowly, he reached to his chest and unclipped the badge that had defined his authority for over a decade. The metallic weight left his hand and transferred to the investigator's palm. A symbolic collapse. Firearm, the investigator added. Briggs removed his service weapon reluctantly, grip stiff, and surrendered it handle first. Procedure, but humiliating under public scrutiny. In the gallery, whispers erupted again, this time not of shock, but consequence. Reporters wrote furiously. One quietly exited to transmit breaking news. The investigator stepped back. You are ordered to remain available for federal review. Do not leave jurisdiction. Briggs nodded numbly. The man who had dominated the room an hour earlier now stood stripped of visible authority. No badge, no weapon, no command presence. Only scrutiny. Judge Halstead addressed the court again. Let the record reflect that Officer Briggs has been relieved of active duty pending investigation. His tone was final, irreversible. Briggs's eyes moved slowly toward General Hayes. Not defiant now, not arrogant. Searching perhaps for reaction, anger, or triumph. But Marcus offered none. He stood composed, hands now free at his sides, posture unchanged from the beginning. That calm dignity deepened the humiliation more than retaliation ever could. The power dynamic had fully reversed. Authority no longer stood with the badge that struck, but with the man who endured the strike without breaking discipline. And as internal affairs escorted Briggs toward the courtroom exit, every step he took echoed the collapse of the authority he once believed untouchable. The courtroom remained silent long after Officer Briggs was escorted out. The weight of everything that had unfolded still hung thick in the air. Humiliation, revelation, consequence, all colliding within the same hour. Judge Halstead adjusted the microphone once more. General Hayes, he said respectfully, the court invites you to address the proceedings if you wish. It wasn't an obligation. It was an acknowledgement. Marcus stood still for a moment, as if measuring the gravity of speaking not as a defendant now, but as a man whose dignity had been publicly tested. He stepped forward slowly, every movement controlled, every step deliberate. The room watched with collective focus. He stopped at the center, turning slightly toward the bench, but his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. I have served this country for 32 years, he began. His tone was calm, steady, not performative, not emotional. Measured truth, not for recognition, and not for rank. He paused briefly, but for the principles this courtroom is meant to protect. The words landed deeper than anger ever could. Several spectators lowered their eyes. Marcus continued. I have commanded soldiers in war zones where discipline meant survival, where restraint meant the difference between escalation and peace. His gaze shifted briefly, not accusatory, but acknowledging the absence where Briggs had stood moments earlier. In those environments, authority is never proven through force alone. He looked back to the judge. It is proven through accountability. The courtroom absorbed every word in silence. No one interrupted. No one moved. Marcus clasped his hands loosely behind his back, not in restraint now, but habit born from decades of military protocol. When I was struck in this courtroom, he continued, I chose not to respond. A faint pause, not because I lacked the ability, but because I understood the responsibility of my position, even when it was not recognized. That statement shifted the emotional gravity again. Strength through restraint, power through discipline. I do not stand here seeking personal damages, Marcus said. A ripple of surprise moved through the spectators. Judge Halstead leaned forward slightly. Marcus continued, I request no financial compensation, The prosecutor exchanged a glance with the defense attorney, both equally surprised. "But I do request institutional reflection," Marcus added. His voice remained steady, "because what occurred here today is larger than one officer, and larger than one defendant." He let that settle before finishing. No citizen, civilian or military, should face humiliation in the very system sworn to protect their rights. Silence followed, deep, respectful. Marcus stepped back from the center. No dramatic flourish, no self-congratulation, just quiet dignity. Judge Halstead nodded slowly. "Your statement is entered into official record, General." In the gallery, the veteran who had saluted earlier did so again, this time joined by two others who had risen silently to their feet. A ripple of respect spread subtly through the room. Not loud, but profound. Marcus returned to his place beside the defense table, posture unchanged from the beginning. The difference now was that the entire courtroom finally understood the discipline they had witnessed from the start, and the moral authority he carried far exceeded any rank written in file. The courtroom proceedings formally adjourned soon after General Hayes' statement, but the impact of what had occurred refused to remain confined within those walls. By the time the judge's gavel struck, the story had already begun spreading. Reporters rushed down courthouse steps, phones pressed to ears, transmitting breaking updates to national newsrooms. Camera crews assembled outside, broadcasting live as legal analysts scrambled to interpret the unfolding scandal. Within hours, headlines ignited across major networks. Decorated U.S. general assaulted by officer in federal court. Courtroom abuse sparks federal investigation. War hero humiliated on camera, nationwide outrage follows. The footage released under court authorization only intensified public reaction. The slap replayed across television screens, social media feeds, and veteran forums worldwide. Outrage came swiftly. Veterans associations issued formal condemnations. Military leadership requested immediate briefings. Civil rights organizations called for structural reform within law enforcement conduct protocols. What had begun as a single courtroom incident had escalated into a national accountability crisis. Inside departmental headquarters, Internal Affairs expanded their investigation overnight. Officer Briggs's record was pulled in full. Past complaints, use of force reports, body cam reviews. Patterns began emerging: aggressive detainment, procedural shortcuts, citizen complaints previously dismissed as inconclusive, now re-examined under federal scrutiny. Judge Halstead himself filed a judicial conduct referral, a rare step signaling institutional concern beyond the individual case. A federal oversight committee authorized the following immediate actions: comprehensive review of Briggs's arrest history, civil rights violation assessment, departmental training protocol, audit, mandatory escalation, control retraining initiatives, expanded body cam compliance enforcement. Each order reflected systemic response, not damage control, but structural correction. Meanwhile, the military issued its own statement. Measured, professional, but firm. General Marcus Hayes represents the highest standards of service, discipline, and constitutional loyalty. Any misconduct directed toward him will be addressed through appropriate federal channels. The statement alone reinforced the gravity of the officer's misconduct. Yet amid media chaos, one voice remained absent: General Hayes. He declined press interviews, refused televised commentary, offered no public criticism. Instead, he returned quietly to his duties, reinforcing the dignity he had displayed throughout the ordeal. That silence, more than any speech, strengthened public respect. He had not sought vindication. He had embodied it. Within the police department, morale fractured under scrutiny. Officers understood that one man's misconduct had triggered nationwide examination of procedural culture. Training supervisors initiated emergency conduct briefings. Command staff reviewed courtroom handling policies. The ripple effects moved fast: administrative, legal, cultural. Judge Halstead later summarized the institutional impact in a formal review note. This incident represents not only individual misconduct, but a critical reminder that authority without restraint undermines justice itself. The words circulated widely in legal circles. By week's end, what happened in that courtroom had evolved beyond scandal. It had become case study material, discussed in law academies, police ethics seminars, and military leadership briefings alike. One officer's abuse of power had triggered national introspection, and at the center of it all stood a general who had never raised his voice, yet forced institutions to confront themselves. Weeks passed after the courtroom incident, but its impact never faded from public consciousness. Investigations moved forward. Departmental reviews concluded. Policy reforms began implementation. But inside the same federal courthouse where humiliation had once unfolded, a very different gathering was being prepared. It was not a trial, not an arraignment, not a disciplinary hearing. It was a formal recognition ceremony. Word had spread quietly, not through media leaks, but official invitation. Military officials, judicial representatives, veteran delegates, and select press were present. The courtroom looked different that day. Brighter, orderly, respectful. Judge Halstead stood at the bench once again, but his expression carried solemn humility rather than procedural authority. When the side doors opened, everyone in the room rose instinctively. General Marcus Elijah Hayes entered in full military dress uniform. Deep navy coat, medals aligned across his chest, Medal of Honor gleaming at the center, surrounded by rows of distinguished service decorations. The same man who had once stood in cuffs now walked freely down the aisle, posture unchanged, dignity intact. But this time, recognized, respected, honored. He approached the front as the judge stepped down from the bench, abandoning positional hierarchy in favor of personal accountability. General Hayes, Judge Halstead began, voice steady but reflective. This court formally acknowledges the misconduct that occurred under its authority. The room listened in silence. On behalf of this judicial body, I extend our apology. It was rare, institutional apology, in open court, but necessary. The judge continued. Your restraint in the face of humiliation demonstrated a level of discipline this system strives to uphold. A military liaison officer stepped forward, presenting an official commendation plaque not for battlefield valor, but for civic dignity. The inscription read, "For exemplary composure and honor in defense of constitutional integrity." Marcus accepted it with a respectful nod. No prideful display. Just acknowledgement. From the gallery, veterans rose one by one, not commanded, but compelled. Salutes formed across the room. Judge, clerks, military officers, even civilian attendees stood in quiet respect. Marcus returned the salute, precise, measured, equal. The ceremony concluded without spectacle. No speeches from politicians. No media theatrics, just institutional closure. As Marcus turned to leave, the older veteran who had recognized him on the first day stepped into the aisle. They faced each other briefly. No words, only mutual understanding forged through shared service. The veteran saluted once more. Marcus returned it. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited beyond barricades. Cameras flashed as he descended the steps. Questions were shouted. General, do you feel justice was served? Do you forgive the officer? He paused only once, turning slightly toward the microphones. His response was brief, measured. Respect isn't proven in comfort. A small pause, but in restraint. With that, he continued down the steps, leaving behind the courthouse, the scandal, and the humiliation. His honor had never been taken, only tested. And in that test, it had stood unshaken.